All right, welcome everybody. We are so excited to talk with you today and to talk about all things related to CDPs with this What the CDP webinar. I'm very glad to have David and Shamir here as my co-hosts and guests. A couple of housekeeping items before we go into the introductions here. First, we will be taking questions towards the end of the webinar. So if you see in the bottom of your Zoom toolbar there's a Q&A button. Feel free to put questions in that Q&A button and we will answer them towards the end of the webinar. If we aren't able to get to them, we can also follow up via email later. All right, so without further ado, I'd love to have David and Shamir introduce themselves and introduce their organizations. Maybe David, if we could start with you and then Shamir.
My pleasure. Thank you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. I think it's morning in most places still. I'm David Raab, founder and CEO of the Customer Data Platform Institute. The Institute is a vendor-neutral organization that is aimed at helping people to do a better job with their customer data. And naturally, the plumber picked today to show up at my house. So if you hear background noise, do not be alarmed. It's merely somebody cutting a hole in the wall.
I'm Shamir Duverseau. I'm a co-founder and managing director here at Smart Panda Labs. We're a consulting agency, and we help organizations to be able to strategize and manage their digital experience tactics to make sure they're in line with customer journey and make sure that they're able to drive revenue and drive results for their organizations.
Awesome, great. And my name is Josh Francia. I am the Chief Growth Officer at Blueshift, a leading smart hub CDP. And if you don't know what that is, we will definitely educate you throughout this webinar on many different types of CDPs. But to get things started, David, as you're kind of like the godfather of CDP in some ways. I don't know if that's a term you appreciate or not, but you were the one that coined Customer Data Platform way back when, and then founded the Customer Data Platform Institute. So it seems very applicable and fitting to have you kick us off with the very essence of a definition of what is a CDP. So would you mind kind of educating and enlightening everybody on the call here on what is a CDP?
Absolutely. So the CDP Institute has its definition, which is that a CDP is packaged software that builds a unified persistent customer database that's accessible to other systems. So we split that into 3 bits, of course. Packaged software, it's something that you buy. It's not something that you build like the old school data warehouses or like a data lake. It is something that builds a unified persistent customer database. So it's unified in the sense that it brings data in from other sources and puts it in one place to build the famous 360 view or unified customer profile. It's persistent, simply meaning that it's stored somewhere, as opposed to being accessed by going back to the original systems sort of on demand when you need it, because there are things that you want to do, like say, look at a customer's history over time, or calculate lifetime value, or track their multiple identities and how those identifiers have been linked together. It really requires the data to be put into one place. And of course, it is accessible to other systems, meaning the CDP is designed to share data. It doesn't simply build the data for its own use, which a lot of other systems do. It actually is designed specifically to let other systems work from that single unified profile throughout the organization, rather than letting each system build its own. So that's our definition. There are others. They're all wrong, and I'm right.
Well, I think you have the credence to kind of say that, but thank you. I think that's a good overview of what is a CDP in the purest sense, right? Does those things that you mentioned. So then the question is, okay, well, why do you need one? Why do you need a CDP? What's the value of getting a CDP? What problems does it solve? So maybe Shamir, maybe we can start with you on this, and then we'll go to you, David, for some commentary. But why do companies and brands need a CDP?
Well, it's really about the expectation of the customer. It's about the fact that nowadays, with so many devices, with so many choices, with so many different opportunities for filling their needs within their reach, they have a really, really high expectation of what they want a brand to do for them. The brand understanding them and knowing who they are and being very consistent across all the experiences they have with that brand. And that's really impossible for a brand to be able to do, to even get close to delivering on, unless they have a central hub to be able to say, oh, who is this person and what do they want? And I need to know who this person is if they're on their mobile device, on an app. I need to know who it is if they're on their PC. I need to know who it is when I send them an email or I show them an ad. And I need that all to be singing the same song. I need that all to be aligned so that they're seeing the same thing in all different ways. Because we've all had that experience where we get so frustrated when it seems like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. When you pick up the phone and call someone and, or you're chatting with someone and it's like, so what do you need again? I just told the person on chat and they just connected me to you. You have that experience. The CDP at its core, right, in its essence, is to solve that problem. It's to say, look, we're going to take all these disparate systems, we're going to have them all in some way, form, or fashion be able to communicate so that we understand you are you, David is David, Josh is Josh, Shamir is Shamir. And even though I'm communicating with them in all these different ways, at least now I can have one holistic view, one compilation of who this person are and the experience with the brand. And now I can consistently communicate with them on an ongoing basis. So a CDP at its core meets that expectation and empowers an organization to meet that expectation.
Awesome. Thank you, Shamir. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because that's something we talk about a lot, which is, when a customer contacts a brand, whether that's going into their store or calling their call center or going on their mobile app, they don't think that they're talking to the product team now. And now I'm talking to the customer contact team. Now I'm talking to the merchandising team. Customers don't think that way. They're just talking to the brand. And every time I've given you data as a brand, I expect you to be able to use that data to make my experience better, right? So it's that unified customer experience that all of us as customers want, like desperately want, and we get very frustrated when we don't get it. And a CDP kind of helps the system do that. David, what are your thoughts on kind of why do brands and companies need CDPs?
Well, that's right. Part of it, or actually the core reason, exactly what Shamir just said, you do it because your customers expect you to do it. The reason you need a CDP to do it is because you can't do it without a CDP, because all of your systems that are gathering the customer data are doing a very fine job of gathering the customer data for their own purpose, but they don't really share it with other systems. They're simply not designed for that. So you can have a lot of good data in your CRM, but your CRM really isn't designed to pull in data from the other places. And it's often difficult even to push the data out from the CRM someplace else. It's not quite pulling teeth, but it's a little harder than pushing a sled downhill, shall we say. So the CDP is built for that. And we consistently, we'll hear people saying, I want to do this. I want to do all the things that my customers expect, but I just can't get my hands on the data in the other systems to do it. And that is exactly where you say, CDP is just for you.
And what are the risks? So we all talk about, we talked about this is what brands and marketers want to do. This is something that, customers want. But what is the risk of a brand or a company says, you know what, I don't need it. I'm not going to use a CDP. I'm not going to get one. I'm not going to onboard one. What are the risks for that brand? Like if we think about the risks, now and maybe in the next 5 years, what are some of their risks that they're giving up that they won't be able to accomplish if they don't go down this trend? And maybe Shamir, we start with you again on some of your thoughts there.
To be frank, it's about customer retention. The customers are eventually, they're going to walk away. Even if it's not one big bad experience, every little bad experience adds up. It creates a frustration. It creates a negative perception and connotation of that brand. And that frustration, that friction that happens over time, it wears on a customer. So the minute that they see an alternative, it's like, well, let's try this because I'm not happy with this. And if that alternative is giving a more consistent experience, well, it's like, well, this is what I've been looking for. And now the other one's completely dismissed. So it's about retaining the customer. Even if you're able to get them in the first place, which CDPs can also play a pretty critical role in doing that. Arguably in the day and age that we're living in, customer retention is just so critically important because it's a lot more expensive to get a net new. It's a lot less expensive to keep someone. So,
Right.
Being obviously in a pandemic, dealing with the economic issues we're dealing with, not knowing what's coming around the corner in the next year, the next 5 years, retention is so important. And it's really about that experience. And it's funny, you mentioned the next 5 years, there's huge, generational shifts that are taking place as well. And as you go down, in the age from generation to generation, those expectations around that digital experience become even more intense, right? That there's even a stronger expectation of what kind of experience they want to have, even less tolerance for craziness. So has generations shift, and as those younger generations get more buying power and they become the primary target consumer, even more so it's become important. And it takes time to put it into place. So starting now means you'll be in a better place in the future.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the retention. You're right. You start losing your customers, and if you start losing customers, you have to get new customers, which are more expensive, right? And you also start losing market share, right? So over time, you actually just become a smaller player in whatever vertical you are, and I guess the end result there is you likely just go out of business, right? Because you just can't compete anymore getting the new customers. You don't have the revenue from your existing customers, which are a lot cheaper to retain. And so you end up fighting this uphill battle against all these newcomers. It can be really, really challenging for you as a business to survive without providing this unified customer experience. As David mentioned, the only way to really do that is to get a CDP to help you do that and allow that to happen. David, what are your kind of thoughts on the risks for a company that doesn't have a CDP?
Well, you really scare me. I think I'm going to have to go out and buy one myself now. Just my God, I'm going to lose all this market share and stuff. But the risk, it really comes back to the expectations. People just assume that you can do it. So if you don't do it, they don't think, well, man, it's hard, and they really are probably trying. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for a call center agent. I get on the phone and they're obviously struggling with their system. And I know enough to say, it's really not your personal fault. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't see it that way. They'll say, the company just isn't trying. Hopefully they don't blame the call center agent, but some of them no doubt do. But even they just don't realize that the company is probably working at it. So they blame the company. Said the company doesn't care. They don't want me as a customer. Well, fine, I'll find somebody else, who does care about me. So it's really that fundamental harm to the customer relationship that is devastating and truly is almost impossible to recover once you destroy one. And there are only so many customers out there. So, it is very much a long-term risk to the company's status in the marketplace. So, yeah, my God, go buy one.
Well, great. And now the thing is, so CDPs, most people have heard of CDPs by now. I would say in the last few years, CDPs have definitely taken the forefront of a lot of marketers' knowledge and saying, oh man, I've heard about this. Gartner's been doing a lot of stuff on it. Forrester's been doing a lot of stuff on it with different hype cycles and things like that. And so as we think about it, are all CDPs created equal? Or are there differences in what as a CDP? It seems like in the last 2 years, a lot of big brands that maybe have been known as something else has kind of migrated to adopt this moniker of a CDP. So are they all created equal, or are there differences within the CDPs? And as marketers, if there are differences, how do you know which one you need? So David, I'm gonna go first to you on this one, because I know you're at the forefront of this a lot of times. What do you say to that? Are all CDPs created equal, or are there differences across the CDP landscape? And if so, what are those differences?
No, they're all the same. Just kidding. Obviously, they're not all the same. But going back to the definition, all CDPs do a certain set of things. And it's what the definition says. They build that unified shareable customer profile. That's what makes you a CDP. Now, that being said, there are CDPs that's all that they do, and that's okay. And then there are CDPs that do that plus other things. So the confusion in the CDP market comes from people who have a CDP that does what a CDP does plus something else. And which flavor of that your particular company needs really depends on what else you have in place. So I don't know, I think we have a slide. I don't know if we're going to show it or not, but this would be the time if we can, that looks at it. So again, some CDPs just do the data assembly. They just build those profiles. Some CDPs, the next kind of thing you do is you do analytics or predictive modeling, typically on top of that. So those are CDPs that kind of have those two sets of capabilities. And I think maybe that arguably is where Blueshift might fit. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Some do that. So they build the profiles, they do the predictive modeling or the other analytics, and they also actually set up marketing campaigns or send out messages. Okay, so that's 3 sets of functionalities. And again, if you don't have a good predictive tool, or you don't have a good campaign tool, or it's not so good that you're not willing to throw it away to get the benefits of unification, you buy one that has that scope. There are some actually that even do delivery, so they have an email engine or whatever on top of that. And there are then others that actually are sort of part of say, an e-commerce system. that has a CDP inside at that point. So yeah, they can pull in data from other systems and they can share it out, but it's just like one feature of a larger package. So yes, they provide you with a CDP, and we call them a CDP because they do that, but there's a lot more going on. So again, which of those you want just depends on what else you have in place and where your business is going and a bunch of other considerations.
Great, thank you, David. So just to recap, it's, CDPs all do kind of the static standard definition, but then you have some that add, some AI kind of analytics, predictive capabilities, also some that add, channel distribution and marketing orchestration capabilities as well. And, those are kind of the flavors added on to maybe the foundational CDP. Shamir, what are kind of your thoughts as you think about all these different types of CDPs, and how do people kind of navigate through them to figure out what's right for them?
It's like going to buy a car, right? I mean, to David's point, all CDPs do fundamentally the same thing. All cars do fundamentally the same thing. But you can have a smart car, or you can have a Mercedes, or you can have a Hummer or a minivan, right? I mean, those are all very different. The features and functions they offer are very different. The purpose is very different, right? If I have 4 or 5 kids, I'm not going to have a smart car. I mean, the same fundamental function, but it doesn't really meet my needs, right? Versus if I'm, maybe a single person, I probably won't have a minivan, So I think it's really about kind of saying, well, what am I trying to accomplish here? What are my unique needs as an organization? What are the expectations of my customer around my product or the service that I offer, right? And kind of answering those questions first. How do those things align with my business strategy and what I'm trying to accomplish in the vision for my organization? And once you kind of have those things, then it's like, okay, great. What is the technology? What is the tool that will help me do that, right? So, I'm a mom, or a dad, and I have X number of kids, and I need to take them to school, and I need to take them to practice, or whatever the case is, and maybe doing this, that, and the other. That kind of says, what, we need a van. We need a minivan, right? That's where the decision comes from. It's not like they immediately pop up and everyone says, I want this kind of car. It's like, what am I trying to accomplish here and do? And then it's, okay, based on all these things I need to do, here's the kind of vehicle I need to be able to accomplish that. So the same thing with a CDP. Based on what your needs are and what you need to do, here's the kind of CDP I need to accomplish that. And if you're someone who already has a pretty strong MarTech stack, and you have a great marketing automation tool, and you have a great personalization tool and so forth like that, but they're not doing a good job at communicating with each other, then the type of CDP you get to solve that use case and to connect to those tools is different than, we don't have really anything from a MarTech standpoint. It'd be a lot easier for us to have a CDP that can not only orchestrate, but can also execute those campaigns. That's a whole different use case. So it just really starts on saying, what do we need as an organization? What is our customer expectation? What's our business goal? Let's line that first. And then what is the technology that's going to accelerate and empower that?
Yeah, absolutely. Your car analogy resonates with me as a father of 5. We're definitely rocking the minivan everywhere we go because it meets our needs, like you said, right? We have five kids. We just can't be rolling up in a sport car. It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't work. What we've heard in the market a lot of companies come to us and they'll use terms like traditional CDP or pure play CDP. I've heard that thrown around a lot. I've also heard these new terms like activated CDP or smart hub CDP and things like that. Well, David, if you hear those terms, traditional pure play CDP, smart hub CDP, activated CDP, how do you delineate the difference between those two? If someone comes to you and say, I'm looking for a pure play CDP, what does that translate to you on those requirements?
Well, now you have me thinking about whether there could be a woke CDP, which I don't think we haven't heard of that one. That comes after activated, I suspect. Again, we kind of put them into 4 or 5 buckets. All right. So we talk about just the data CDPs that just build the profiles. We're super lazy about naming. Then we have the ones that do the analytical features plus the data features, and we call those analytical CDPs. And we have the ones that do the analytical features and the data features and the campaign or messaging features, and we call those, you guessed it, campaign CDPs. The ones that add delivery to the mix are delivery CDPs. The ones that have operational features with the CDP inside are no prizes, your operational CDPs. So we just look at it like, in a very boring kind of incremental fashion as to what they do. When people talk about pure play, they're really talking about what I would typically call data. When they talk about an activation CDP, they're really talking about something that probably have what we refer to as messaging or campaign capabilities. So they're, but basically what usually happens is when it's coming from a vendor, it's, well, whatever the vendor says, whatever the vendor does, oh, the definition of CDP just happens to be exactly what my feature set is, and everybody else is wrong. There's the Goldilocks thing, that's either too much or too little, but ours is just right.
And then as we were talking about, if you, Shamir, you mentioned this earlier, if you're a company that, starting from scratch, right, and you don't really have a MarTech stack at all, and you've heard about CDPs, and you want to do obviously orchestration and campaign management and journeys, and you do want to do some predictive modeling and some AI, is there extra value that you get from bundling it all into one solution with maybe like a Smart Hub CDP that has those components built in on top of a foundational CDP? And is there more value doing it together for both MarTech, fresh MarTech stacks that are brand new, or MarTech stacks that may be using technology in different pieces, but some of that technology may not connect very well. It may not be seamless. What's your thought there? If a customer's coming to you with that issue and say, should I do it all in one? I need these three pieces, or should I keep them separated? Is there value to having it together or not? What are your thoughts on that?
Ultimately, it depends, right? It depends on the exact use cases that the customer has. And it depends on their end customers. A lot of it depends on the vision of the organization and where it wants to go and what it wants to do, kind of where it wants to eventually end up, because the CDP is going to be a key element of the foundation of what they end up doing from a marketing technology standpoint. So it kind of depends. All things being equal, which they never are, but let's just pretend. All things being equal, if you're just entering into the fray of not just CDP, but also CDP and kind of MarTech technology stack, you're probably going to get a faster return on investment by going with a Smart Hub, by going with one that allows you to take that data and make it immediately actionable. Just because, you think about it, you get a CDP, and then you have to get a marketing automation platform, and then you have to get maybe a personalization platform, or something else. So now you have to get all those. So those are all separate implementations. So now you got 3 or 4 implementations going, and then you have to integrate them all and have them all talk to each other, right? So that's another thing. And then you need experts in each of those tools, right? So I need to learn these 3 or 4 different tools because I need to, or have a third-party partner that knows those tools, or whatever the case is, right? And now you've got also multiple points of failure because this one has to talk to this one. So it's like, well, where did this break? Where did this break down? So it adds a lot of complexity from the very beginning. Now there may be a use case to do that, but again, all things being equal, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot faster to get started to say, look, this is the one thing. We implement this one thing. We can immediately, it talks to itself, so it can immediately take action, and you can build campaigns and start executing and get things out to the market faster, and then start seeing the return on being able to orchestrate that data.
Got it. David, any comments or thoughts on that topic?
No, that's exactly right. It totally depends. We always say that what you want to do is you want to look at what you're trying to accomplish, what's stopping you from accomplishing it, which is to say, what are the gaps in my systems that I have to fill? And then what's the best way to fill that? So if I'm greenfield, then kind of like everything's a gap because I have nothing, right? So then it sort of makes sense to buy one system that'll do it all, assuming, of course, you can find a system that actually will do it all, that has the functionality at whatever level of sophistication you're going to expect to need for the next couple of years. Nothing's forever. You talked about a 5-year horizon. Nobody has a clue what's going to happen in 5 years. Look, we're not too sure what's going to happen, next week, and we sure don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now, and 5 years. I can't even imagine. So 2-3 year time horizon is reasonable for most marketing technology. To think if it lasts that long, I've gotten my money's worth out of it. So if it looks like I can buy something, again, our greenfield scenario, that will one CDP that'll meet what I expect to need reason for the next 3 years, cool, buy the one system, save all the grief of integration. And no matter how simple integration is, because these things are designed to be simple to integrate, it still works. And it's still 3 acquisitions and 3 throats that you have to choke. So you really want, the burden of proof is on somebody who wants to buy more than one tool. But again, if you have good stuff in place, different set of issues. How hard will it be to integrate? How much do I like it, or am I willing to rip it out? So then it gets much more complicated in the real world.
Right.
as the real world tends to do.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the future, because that's the great area where none of us can be wrong or right about the future. It's a green field in itself. So we talked a little bit about CDPs have come up in the last few years, have gained a lot of attraction, a lot of adoption. Marketers are starting to think about it. What does that long-term tech stack look like, and CDP's role in that? And I would love to get your guys' thoughts on that. Is this something that for CDP becomes a CRM for marketing, as sales has kind of adopted the CRM and has stayed for multiple decades and continues to be like the main foundational layer for that group or that department? Or does it morph? Does it change? What are you guys' thoughts on that? Maybe David, we'll start with you this time and then go to Shamir.
Yeah, I think that what you really want to do is think of CDP not as a category or a type of software, but as a set of functions. All right. And the need for a unified, persistent, shareable customer database will not go away. And that's something that, 5-10 years ago, people didn't quite necessarily realize that. But now we definitely know that there's going to be a lot of systems out there. They're going to have a lot of data. No one system is going to do everything. We're going to need some place to pull that data together that's its own system, its own database. That will not change. So insofar as the CDP is a function, that's with us for the foreseeable future. Okay. Now, how you buy that thing, you buy it as a standalone product, you buy it as part of something else. Does your CRM magically become capable of performing the functions of a CDP? I kind of doubt it for technical reasons. It's hard to make one system do both those two very different features, and basically systems are usually good at one thing. So if you're designed to be a great CRM, you're probably not designed to be a great CDP. But maybe some things change. Again, technology is pretty amazing. So it's possible that you have one system that combines them, or some of the other classes of CDPs we look like. So we don't really know what the pieces are going to be, what the categories of software are going to be. Well, we do know the functions are going to be required, and yeah, that CDP function is going to be there, regardless of how you achieve that function.
And then Shamir, same question to you.
I mean, really the same as David mentioned. I think the two things that really jump out to my mind that are going to affect the future, and I'm not quite sure how they'll affect it, are one being machine learning, right? And how that's incorporated into that. Because you have one system that's doing machine learning, and this other system is also doing its machine learning, and it's like, well, are you guys coming to the same conclusion? Because you're the one saying this should happen, you're saying this should happen. So is that easier for then one thing to be making this decision? And so I'm thinking about that and those complexities. And then another thing I'm thinking about is, so many technologies for so many of the companies today are purchased, right? So company X decides that, okay, we need to get into this, whatever, this CDP game, so we're going to buy this. Or, we need to get to the marketing automation game, so we're going to buy this, and we're going to incorporate this into our family or suite of products, so that we can say we offer all these components. But I mean, buying it doesn't magically make it work well with your suite of products. And we've probably all seen that, probably even experienced that with maybe marketing technologies that we've bought. And it can oftentimes take several years before that actually, it gets to the point where that's close to happening, where it's like, okay, these two things, these two components, this used to be this old thing, but now these two actually, they play well together and they get along fine and they can talk. But simply buying it and slapping a brand name on it doesn't make that happen, right? So you have to kind of work through that too, and how does that game of of all these moving pieces and parts, that game of chess of what company buys what company and aligns with what company, how does that end up kind of playing out and becoming the system that people need? Because to David's point, I mean, you have a CRM which is very good at doing this thing, and a CDP is very good at doing at this other thing, and those two systems, it's very important they work well together. Does someone eventually kind of come up with a really powerful tool that is both a CDP and a CRM, and call it in one shot? And I know there are a couple that position themselves as that, right? So is that kind of the direction it goes? Well, potentially, that's definitely one way that can make sense. But to David's point, it just goes to how do we best accomplish the different functions that need to be accomplished? And that's just hard to predict, especially in a capitalist society where so many people go so many different ways, and you just kind of pick the direction that you feel like is best for you and your organization.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great. Well, thank you. Well, guys, we have a ton of questions. So let's go to some of these questions. They're very interesting. And I think I've heard a lot of these questions whenever I've talked to prospects and customers before. So maybe the first question that we hit is a question from one of our attendees is, what's the difference between CDP and a LiveRAMP type of a service? You know, I'm sure you guys have heard this before in several different questions, but you know, if you look at CDPs and you look at LiveRAMP, what are the differences between those two offerings? And maybe Shamir, we'll start with you, and then go to David.
Sure. So I think LiveRAMP is the DMP solution, if I'm not correct. Yeah. So fundamentally speaking, and I guess you can answer this a few different ways. I'm actually kind of curious to see how David answers this, but in my perspective, a DMP can deal with different types of data, right? So you can deal with third-party data, second-party data, even to some degree first-party data. So you can definitely deal with different types of data. But what a DMP doesn't by its nature do, which to me is kind of the core function of a CDP, and its job is, as CDP's job is to stitch, right? So its job is to figure out, hey, person, Josh on this device, and Josh who got this email, and Josh who saw this ad, and Josh who was on his desktop, that's all the same Josh, right? So a CDP, is to take all those things and say, okay, now I know that all those times I saw this, that's all the same Josh, right? And as it goes down and learns more and says, oh, and it's also this Josh who was on this tablet this other day. Okay, that's the same Josh too. And to stitch all that together. That, to me, at its core, that's why you buy a CDP, because it takes all those things and it figures out this is all the same person. And I need to put, create a key ring, so to speak, and put all those keys in the same ring and know that this is the same person. Now I know when I'm dealing with Josh, this is who I'm dealing with across all these different systems, and I can now deal with it consistently. So even though, a system like a LiveRAMP or a DMP can certainly deal with first and second and third party data, and they do great jobs at doing it, their core functionality is not to figure out that this is all the same person in all these different places, and to put that all together so that you can now say, okay, this is my person. I now have a 360-degree view, and now I can continue to move forward and talk to them as the same person.
David, what are your thoughts on that question? LiveRAMP type services versus a CDP, what are the differences?
So it does get super confusing because these guys kind of change their positioning and even their true functionality day to day. LiveRAMP and LiveRAMP was bought by Axiom. There's a whole long history, which certainly we don't want to go into right now. But they are a service. They're a company that you go to, and what they can do is they can enhance your data. So you give them an email address, they can come back and they can tell you which cookies it belongs to, or something like that. All right. And in fact, a CDP might actually draw on LiveRAMP to do some of that identity graph management or identity resolution work, because that takes information that a particular client, CDP user, won't necessarily have on their own. They don't have the access. They don't have the breadth of information on what are all the devices this person has, because they have no way to know it unless that person is actually interact with them on their device. So you go out to a LiveRAMP or some other identity resolution service to build or at least enhance your identity graph that says, oh wow, these two IDs really are the same person. I didn't know that, but LiveRAMP knew that, and they told me, so I can pull them together and do something with it. What the CDP will do that a LiveRAMP doesn't do, it's a CDP will keep all the other data that you have about them. So all their transaction history, all their web browsing history, all their call center history, pull all that in again into that unified persistent database, which LiveRAMP would never do for you. They're just a service that does that one thing of helping you pull together those unified identifiers, but they don't store all the other data, which means you can't do the analysis, all the stuff you want to do with that data. You can't share that data out to your other systems because LiveRAMP doesn't have it in the first place. So it's a very, very different set of functions, but they can complement each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use LiveRAMP as a partner of Blueshift, and one of the reasons that we use that is they do the same things that you're saying, David. They do that kind of identity resolution. They know more about your customer or who the identity is, but they don't know everything else about your customer, right? So you have that rich data inside of CDP. But what LiveRAMP also does really well, and how it complements the CDP, is they have connections to a lot of paid media places, a lot of destinations. So you can then take your customer profile data from your CDP and push it to over 500 different media publications. And, of course, some of those are very niche. Those are very specific to use cases, which certain verticals need to be in and need to be competitive. And others are much more broad where everyone kind of competes with. So that's very valuable. So thank you. So hopefully we're able to answer that question for our attendee. All right, there's a few more here. So one other question is, how do you differentiate between the database and data management versus the CDP application and interface? If we wanted to build our own database systems, how applicable are CDP applications at working on top of those systems? So that's an interesting question. So maybe David, I'll start with you, and maybe I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on how do you separate the database versus the CDP application and those different pieces?
Okay, it's a great, very intriguing question. So the database, and database means something very specific, structured data, SQL, relational database kind of thing, as opposed to data store. And most CDPs use a data store that's not necessarily a database. All right, data store is a little more flexible, not quite so structured. All right, but I think the underlying thing they're getting at is there's the one thing storing the data, and the other thing using or activating or maybe woking the data.
Right.
If we want to think about that. Now,
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with that image, which is really sad. And that's a very different thing. Any CDP, by definition, they share. Remember, that's part of the definition: shareable data, accessible to other systems. So at a minimum, they can all do segmentation, and most of them have some way to actually let a third-party system access their data through an API or a query or some way to read this data from the CDP as opposed to the CDP pushing the data out. So that's the minimum. But then a lot of them, again, have these other capabilities beyond simply pushing out segments or letting another system read their data of doing, creating, identifying segments, doing predictive, doing all the other functionalities that we talked about that are doing campaign management. So those are more applications. And again, some CDPs have those capabilities or those applications, some don't. But the minimum application you want is you need some sort of an interface that lets you actually segment the data and pull out segments and push them to other systems where they can do their magic. That's the minimum application you want in a CDP.
Great. Shamir, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, it's really about, there's basically, and David said it, but there's basically two components here. There's like having the data, and then there's using it, right? And for a long time, it seems like we got ourselves very obsessed with having data. Like, we need to have all this data, we need to analyze all this data.
Right.
We need to understand what's happening. We need to apply all this science to all this data. It's great. And we run into it with clients all the time, and it's like, we need to track all this, we need to gather all this, we understand all this. It's like, well, okay, what are you going to do with that? Like, right. What decision would you make with that piece of information? And it's like, well, I don't know. Well, it's like, why do you want it, right? So it's, so getting the data is great, but I mean, you have to get it in such a way that it becomes actionable. And because of expectations, that action needs to be pretty much near real time nowadays. I mean, you need to be able to very quickly be able to leverage and use that data. It can't be, kind of the daily or weekly or something, dump of data into something, and now it can make an informed decision. Well, I need to be able to directly talk to the system that's making the decision and have that data in real time, right? I need to be able to pass the information on from this interaction with chat to the call center system, so that when that gets transferred, I can see, oh, I can see you were talking to, to so-and-so, and apparently you have a problem with your X, Y, or Z. That needs to be real time, right? And that's the power of the application, is to be able to say, hey, my job, among other things, my job is to be able to say, I can make this actionable. I can quickly pass the data along. I can share this data in a way that now you can make decisions and take actions based on that.
Right, great. Well, there's more questions flowing in, so thank you everyone for asking these questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So another question that's come in is, again, around data, no surprise, but it's, how does CDP differ from customer master data management or MDM solutions? And can these two applications complement one another in an enterprise? So maybe David, we can start with you on that question, because I think that is something very interesting. A lot of enterprise businesses will have MDM layers and things like that. So how do these two things work together, or how do they differ?
Right, okay, so the first thing to realize is that MDM is something that IT departments are really familiar with. Master data management's been around for a long time. Customer, as a domain of master data, the master data management works with all kinds of data: product data, location data, person, employee data, and customer data. About half of MDM is customer data, so it's always been a big part of MDM. At least traditional MDM originally was about actually that identity management stuff we just talked about, looking at all the identifiers you're having for somebody and recognizing it's really the same person doing the identity resolution, typically creating a so-called golden record that says, okay, all the different versions I have of David Raab, here's what I think is the best address for him. Here's what I'm pretty sure is the right way to spell his name. Here's what I think is his current phone number, because I probably have a lot of old things that are floating around and they're coming in different sequences. So I might get his old phone number even after he's actually gotten a new phone number because that system is lagging for whatever reason. So the MDM was designed to resolve all that, come up with a single version of truth, and then push it out to all the other systems so everybody was using the same, again, golden record as a reference. Current MDM systems, I'm told by some of the MDM vendors, will actually do more than that. They'll store not just the identity data or the entity identifiers, but the other data, like all the details. So they then begin to look an awful lot like a CDP. So when you describe what CDP does to an IT person, they say, oh, that sounds like an MDM system. And in some ways it really is, especially that broader flavor of MDM. But of course, that's MDM is an enterprise-wide thing by definition. It wasn't designed specifically for marketing, even though customer data is important. It wasn't designed just for customer data. So you have other features in your CDP system that are more tied to marketing, to the extent that it's a marketing-oriented CDP, which most of them are, that really weren't part of MDM. So part of it's a language thing. IT people have a different name in mind and it sounds familiar. Part of it is actually some differences in functionality. And in particular, the CDP always stores all that other data beyond just the identifiers, whereas MDM usually doesn't. Maybe it does. If it's storing all the other data, then maybe you should even call it MDM. Maybe they should change it and call it a CDP.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thank you, David. That was a great answer, a great thought process. There's about 3 questions around this one topic. And Shamir, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, as well as yours, David. So these 3 questions, they all attach us from a different angle, but one is like cookies are going away, privacy is increasing. There's there's a lot of regulations and legislation in different locales that allow users now to determine whether or not they're tracked and used for retargeting and remarketing purposes. There's updates that are happening on technology devices, iOS and Android are coming out and rolling out things that make it harder to track anonymous behavior and be able to do that. So there's a bunch of questions around that. Maybe we can just answer it all for one and say, well, how does CDPs help with that, right? How does CDPs get around some of these issues, or how does CDPs help you navigate some of these things as a marketer so you can still be able to target and track and message and market to the customers that you need to?
I mean, frankly, this is a problem, and it's going to be a problem for a little bit until kind of get to kind of a relatively stable place in terms of like people feel like, okay, this is what we want in terms of privacy, and then we kind of say, okay, if this is kind of the playing field here, now what are we doing moving forward? I mean, until then, CDP and other systems too, but a CDP is ultimately saying, look, I'm not just looking for one single thing to determine who you are. Like, so a cookie is certainly one thing it's looking at, but it's not the only thing it's looking at, right? It's looking at multiple things and trying to figure out who you are. So it's looking for, your cookie, it's looking for an IP address, it's looking for you to come from a certain email, to click on an email, it's looking for you to log into something. So it's looking at, it's listening for a lot of different things to try to discern who you are. And some of those things are not going to be a problem. I mean, if you're being sent an email because you've already subscribed to someone's database and you click on that email on your mobile device, well, now I know who Josh is on this device because I sent an email to Josh. I know that, okay, that's Josh now. I don't have to guess. This isn't an issue really of any anonymous tracking. I know it's Josh. If he logs into his mobile app or he logs onto the website, I know that's Josh. He just logged in, right? So sometimes we lose sight of the fact that there are ways that customers often expressly tell you who they are. And depending on your brand and what makes sense, if you can design those ways into your customer experience, and you have to return value for that. So like, you tell me who you are, and here's how I'm going to help you with that. And retail is great at this because they do wish lists and those kinds of things, right? Where you can kind of save things and reserve things. So it's like, I'm giving you value for you telling me who you are, but that's what they're getting. They're getting this explicit way in which you're saying, you're Josh. Great, I got you're Josh. And now, because you wish list this thing while you were searching at work on your desktop, and now you're on, later at night, you're on your mobile phone, well, I'm going to log in here too, or I'm going to log into the app, and I'm going to do that too because I want to see what's on my wish list. Great, now I know you're the same person here, right? So I think it's just a matter of remembering that when it comes to tracking, especially when it comes to a CDP standpoint, and I mean, this is a whole other issue if you're talking about like third-party tracking and all that kind of stuff. But from a CDP standpoint, there's multiple different ways it's trying to figure out and discern who you are. And the more explicit those ways that you can build into your system, that the CDP can listen for, the better off you are anyway, because the more sure you are that you've got the right person in the right place. And a lot of brands are already doing that. It's just a matter of just leveraging that across different devices and systems to be able to, again, stitch that together.
Absolutely. David, what are your thoughts on this? I know it's always a hot topic, as it almost seems like every month there's something new coming out from technology providers or from legislation or something that's saying, hey, privacy is going to reduce the amount of transparency that people will have and marketers and companies will have on what their customers are doing and where they're doing it. How does CDPs in general think about that? How do you think about that?
Usually when this topic comes up, the first thing I do is I put up a nice picture of a kitten, like playing with a ball of yarn, and say, calm down, folks, just relax. The world is not ending. Just stare at this kitten for a couple of seconds and catch your breath, okay? Because third-party cookies are like, if you actually do the math, they're about 1% of the advertising, of the marketing budget is spent on things that are impacted by third-party cookies, because most of it's, only a quarter of it's spent on media, and only half of that is online. A lot of that is in the places like Amazon and Facebook, where cookies aren't even an issue, and inside of apps. Right? So we're only to a little thing, but there are really two things to worry about. Okay, the first is that I do have this third-party data that has cookies that provide a large stream of data to me that will go away or is going away. And how do I deal with that? And again, there are other kinds of identifiers, as Shamir was just talking about, and the CDPs can help with that. They can help, make the most use and get the most matching possible out of those identifiers. Second thing to bear in mind, there's more than two things, is that first-party data is not that much impacted. I think Shamir said this as well. That's data you already have. And that's not so much impacted by whether third-party data becomes available or not. So again, the CDP helps you make a better use of that data, make the fullest possible use. The third thing to bear in mind is that a lot of these new privacy rules, particularly things like CCPA with do not sell, require you, and in GDPR as well, require you to actually not just collect data or not collect it, but actually get consent for particular uses. You have to justify what's the legal basis for use of this particular piece of information, which means you have to capture specific kinds of consent. And that's separate from cookie consent. There's cookie consent and there's usage consent, and they're not the same thing, and you have to deal with both of them. And you have to have some place to store that consent, and then you have to have some place to actually show that you're using data in ways that you can legally justify, again, that you have a legal basis for that. So the CDP gives you a place to keep those consents. It gives you a place to have rules that say, oh, you know what, this person wants to use this piece of data for this information. Do I have on file a consent that says, yeah, okay, that person is given permission for that, or I have some other legal basis, like along business operations, there's a handful of them that don't require consent to let me use it. But the CDP kind of gives you at least a point of control, a single point of access to all your data, where you can say, okay, yep, I've checked this request to use this data that came in from marketing or whomever, and yeah, it's valid. I can let this happen, or no, it's not valid. I can't let this happen, or I can do it for this person who's given consent, and I can't do it for that person who hasn't given consent. So there's this whole other side of it beyond just the third-party data concern that has to do with the management, and the CDPs are very well positioned to do that.
Yeah, I love that idea, the consent management piece, which, consent management used to essentially be opt in or opt out emails, right? That was it. Maybe push notifications, those kind of came around, and it was very binary, yes or no, I want these. And that was it. And there was a lot of the canned spam legislation that came out to enforce that and other things. But now it's much more fragmented than just those, right? It's opting to say, can you track me without knowing who I am? Can you track my session or track my web browser? And CDPs are very well positioned to be able to do all that consent management in one place. And that's a big thing, right? Because there's a lot of risk if you get that wrong, right? There's a lot of risk if you get that wrong. And so to have that federated out into multiple systems to see like, hey, am I able to talk to this person or not, is very risky for a business. And it's great to have it all in one place and have a customer really at the forefront and say, yes, your banner popped up. Yes, I'm okay with you tracking me. And now we timestamp that, we put in the CDP, it goes on to David or Shamir's profile, and now I know I can track you and then retarget you with cookies or whatever, or no, I can't. And that's the reason. And so now you can adjust all that because it's the same place where you do your marketing. It's the same place you do your outreach. It's the same place you're also doing your consent management. So there's a lot of synergies there. Okay, we have time for one last question. Actually, two. There's one quick one that I'll answer. It's about Blueshift, and it said, hey, there's a lot of different flavors of CDPs. What flavor is Blueshift? Blueshift is considered a smart hub CDP. So as we were talking earlier, and David and Shamir were talking about, you have kind of these CDPs, these core foundational CDPs, then tack on things. And one of the things they tack on is AI and predictive. Another thing they tack on is campaign orchestration or marketing channel management. Well, Blueshift does all three of those. And so that's that smart and hub parts of the CDP. Smart's the AI, hub is the orchestration to all your marketing channels and beyond. And then obviously the CDP is a foundational layer. Okay, so the second question, this will probably be our last question, is we're talking about analytics and predictive modeling. One of the questions comes in, how much time do you need, or how much data do you need in a CDP before you could actually get benefits from these data models and these predictions? And I think that question happens a lot, and people want to say, hey, I get my CDP up and running on Monday, Tuesday, tell me who to target, right? And maybe it's not that simple. So I'd love to kind of hear your guys' thoughts, and I have kind of the Blueshift perspective on this, but how much time does it take before you can start getting the data in and actually using it for some of those machine learning or predictive modeling? So maybe, Shamir, we can start with you and then go to David.
I'm not sure I would put it necessarily so much in a factor of time as I would put it in a factor of how much information does the system need to begin to create an actionable model, right? So, if you have 10,000, 100,000 sessions a month on your website, that's not likely going to be enough for it to be able to make a decision. And you're talking about probably upwards of close to 1 million, over 1 million sessions a month before it has enough information to be able to say, okay, I can begin to now predictively say, okay, this is the direction things are going to go. It's more, at least the way I think about it anyway, it's more of an issue of volume than it is an issue of time. And a lot of players just don't have the volume for that. At least at this point, who knows where science is going to go, and it may come to the point, it's like, if you have 10 people, we can predict where, I don't know what's going to happen in a few years, as David kind of mentioned, but right now it's an issue of volume. You just using it, the system needs a lot of information to be able to do it. And you think about the players who do that a lot, right? You think about like the social media players, like the Facebooks of the world who do that. Well, it's because they have a crap ton of traffic, right? And that's why they're able to do that and do that so quickly, because they have so much volume to be able to make a decision, to be able to test something, to be able to experiment. They get so much volume that goes through, they can quickly do them. And it comes down to math that we're not fortunately going to go into now, but it comes down to being able to do the math and be able to make those calculations that need to happen to be able to make those determinations and take those actions. So it's a volume issue, and unless you're really, really, really high volume, you're just not in a place where you can take advantage of those predictive methodologies. Now, there's other recommendation things you can do that isn't so much about volume. It's a little bit more much about activity. It's just saying, hey, we see, when you see some of those recommendations of, hey, people who bought this bought that, that doesn't take near as much volume, because you're just saying, hey, of all the people who bought this thing, we also saw that 70% of them also bought this thing, right? That just is what it is. Now, whether that 70% is 100,000 or it's 500,000 or 50,000, it's just 70%. Most of the people who did this did that. You don't need that same kind of volume to do that. But when it comes to predictive modeling, when it comes to that kind of more machine learning, kind of like looking at and saying, hey, this person has a propensity to do this based on these activities and actions, then that's where kind of that volume comes into play.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shamir. David, any comments on that, or any closing comments? We're almost getting to the end of our hour here.
Yeah, no, let me just agree with what Shamir said. It depends on what you're trying to do, and some things take more data than others, and sometimes you build it up over time, but basically he's absolutely right. It is a volume game. So let's leave it for that. Closing comments. Buy a CDP. You need a CDP. CDPinstitute.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much to both of you. And I feel like we'll put this slide up real quick. If you want more information from any of the three organizations, here's the way you can contact us. Contact at Smart Panda Labs, info@cdpinstitute.org, or hello@Blueshift. Thank you, Shamir and David, so much for your time. Thank you all that attended, and thank you special for those that shared their questions. We got some really great questions, and hopefully everyone came away with this with a little more knowledge about what a CDP is, why you need it, and how important it is for your future as a company. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.